that the remit for this is about the approach that we're taking to the vision rather than the details. So detailed questions would be answered at a later date. And it's not about each individual library or the detail around the operations. It is about the vision and the approach that we're taking for the plan for the libraries as we move forwards. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of background to set the scene in terms of the library service as we know it now, what the library service has achieved, particularly through lockdown and obviously over the last 18 months, which has required the service to change slightly or considerably, and then what that then means for us as we move forwards in terms of the approach that we're taking before moving on to questions. I'm going to go through it as succinctly as I can do, because I think the benefit of this session is really to give you the opportunity to ask questions. Some have been submitted before, as has been outlined. There will be an opportunity as we progress where you can put them in the chat, and then the chair will pick them up and pass them on accordingly. So I hope that sets the scene before we start. Beyond today, there will be further opportunities to engage. As has been outlined, the slides will be shared. We'll be publishing them online. For that reason, forgive me if I'm reading off the slides a bit more than I normally would, but quite clearly, if the slides are going to go online, we need to make sure they have some context for people, whereas otherwise they would just be sort of reference points. But I think that the presentation overall will give you the perspective in terms of where we're coming from and leads into the approach that we're taking for the service as we move forwards. Okay, if we could start, please, Paul. So our library service, 74 libraries across the county. Obviously, that some of those are in town centres, others more rural. We have 2 mobile library vehicles, a strong online e-library service, and a home library delivery service, which is provided by our volunteers, particularly for those residents who couldn't otherwise access the libraries in terms of buildings and the services that are on offer. So a very comprehensive offer that we have across the whole of the county. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the County Council is the second largest library authority in the country. 1.5 million people. We're obviously a very diverse county in terms of the geography and the communities. So this summer we joined the UK's largest library consortium. This was along with 18 other library authorities across London and Thurrock. And the key point around this is that it's given Essex residents access to an additional 6 million titles. So that really has made a difference in terms of the opportunity for people to borrow different titles and different books. We've also invested in the library management system to improve accessibility to the library services, compatibility with mobile devices, and there's a new app which can be downloaded onto mobiles as well. So brief word here really around the breadth, I suppose, of our library service. So clearly, books are at the heart of what the library offers, but in reality, the service goes far beyond that. So books, e-books, e-newspapers, magazines, novels, they all form a fundamental part of the offer. We've also provided some research tools for people to research their family history. There's events and opportunities for groups to come together across the piece. And signposting to other services, and this is an area where we're seeing growing opportunities for the library. Class visits for schools, the summer and the winter reading challenges, I'll talk about both of them in more detail shortly. Author events and activities which encourage families to visit the library. And then obviously the IT offer in terms of the Wi-Fi and the computers. And then the health and wellbeing support, which again is another area of the service which has been growing over the last 18 months and where we have plans to grow that further. Staff training and development. So our libraries are obviously run by our own staff, and that will be continuing. There is an absolute commitment there that they will be ECC funded staff. As part of that, as you would expect with any organisation, we will be ensuring, as we do, that they are fully trained and that they have relevant qualifications that are needed to perform the role, and that training continues as the service develops. There's obviously more that can be said on that, which I'm sure we'll come on to later. but the staff are at the heart of the commitments that we're making. So there will be formal training opportunities, accreditations in terms of some of the qualifications that they can seek to attain, but the absolute commitment there around our staff in terms of our libraries. So despite that, and that commitment, I say, is clearly there, I do want to recognise and say thank you to the just over 200 volunteers who take part in a range of opportunities within the library service, because they really do help us enhance them. The home library service, which is already outlined, obviously enables us to deliver the service to people's front doors. The summer reading challenge, where we had over 500 volunteers take part. And I think what's important to highlight here is not just what that meant for the library service, but what that meant for those individuals as well. So the vast majority of them were very young, and in many cases still at school or in education. And through speaking to them, obviously with what's happened over the last 18 months, opportunities around work experience or something, paid Saturday job type employment has been very limited. And they were working with us as a way of obviously helping to deliver the summer reading challenge. There were 17,000 youngsters that took part in that, but also as a way of building out their experience and their CVs when they went off to college or jobs or university. So I think there's a real benefit here, where we could do more with that, more with initiatives such as these, to make sure that we can really support those individuals who are helping to work with us. So there's more of a win-win. Number of other opportunities here, the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme, and then the involvement in some of our activities, our very popular rhyme times and coding clubs. And in some cases, they have helped to support extended opening hours, as you can see in those two examples there. So during lockdown and during COVID, it has required the library service to adapt, and in many ways quite fundamentally. Nevertheless, they developed over 100 virtual sessions, which included the rhyme times, children's author events, children's creative writing workshops, and various other sessions, where there were 100,000 views, and that, as it says, that number is still growing. Face-to-face school class visits had to be adapted to online, and we did continue to engage live with primary age children via Zoom, and also attended the virtual summer read assemblies via Zoom with a number of primary schools. And again, I think this is an area where we can really seek to look at what it is that the libraries can do in terms of supporting some of the catch-up schemes and the work that our schools are doing. We continue to deliver the home library service during lockdown, and some wellbeing and befriending calls which came alongside that. And as I'm sure you'll appreciate, during the last 18 months, particularly for those who have been more socially isolated, that has been a really welcomed and really important to their well-being. And then continuing to promote our e-resources through social media platforms, podcasts, trying to encourage people to carry on reading, and extend access to some family research tools for people to access from home. We've introduced a really different offer to promote the services, like the mindfulness sessions. This is very much aimed at new parents and children, and it's very much centred around mental well-being and general well-being, and the knock-on effect that can have, and the linkage to getting people into the libraries and being familiar with library services and what that can then mean as they take it forward, particularly around school readiness and literacy, and just encouraging people to enjoy reading. And to see what else it is that they can get from the library. The free theatre events have promoted books and reading, and widened our outreach activities, including the holiday activity food programmes. So those sessions, there were 330,000 of them across the county, which ran over the school holidays. And those sessions enabled youngsters to come along, enjoy themselves in terms of positive outdoor predominantly activities, and have a hot meal whilst they were there. But for the first time, we also brought the library service to those sessions as well, and that enabled the youngsters to obviously have books read to them, to hear the books, to bring the characters to life, to hear about the different novels, and then to take that into some of their other activities, so to really try and bridge that gap around more formal learning, but also to make sure that they're having fun with it, and to think about the knock-on effect that can have. And that's something that I'm very keen, as I'll come on to shortly, around how we can start to use the libraries more to forward other initiatives. So our Reading Friends scheme help those who were feeling particularly isolated, and with that particularly successful partnership in Colchester. We run the Essex Book Festival, 12 events, 11 in person, 1 online, and just over 330 attendees, obviously having to be mindful of social distancing. And then just finally on the COVID piece, Essex Libraries were one of the first in the country to open in-person services when we were given the green light to do so, and when we were told in accordance with health and safety that we could proceed. So the Summer Reading Challenge, which I touched on earlier, 17,000 children across the county took part. Fantastic initiative. It's a national initiative. It's something that we embrace each year. But I am really keen to see how we can take this further. So we will be actually holding a winter reading challenge this year as well, which I'll touch on again in a minute. Enabling the youngsters to come in, to take the 6 books out, get their certificates, get their medals, and to try and encourage, during that, obviously the quieter period in terms of the school holidays, when they've got some downtime from school, to give them that opportunity to encourage them and to continue with their reading, and particularly on the back of the last 18 months where we know that there are still gaps in learning, and to see what it is that we can do to support them. I am going to be looking for next year as well around how we can move beyond just the National Reading Challenge, and what does that mean around some local awards that we can give children, how we can support schools, link up with them more closely, and really help to bring some of the characters and the books to life. So I think there's much more that we can do there. And particularly in some of our more deprived areas where we know that school attainment is lower than we would otherwise want it to be. Next slide, please. So highlights of our upcoming calendar. I've mentioned the reading challenge already for this winter. The idea there about bridging the gap between what we're doing in the summer and not leaving it to the following year, but to encourage that ongoing commitment and love of reading. Love Your Library Days, opportunities there for us to really promote what the library offers, and then to think about the learning fairs and ACL, Talk, Listen, Cuddle. Again, some great opportunities here to really get youngsters involved. Silver Sunday, Black History Month, these are all key points in the diary where we will be really promoting different causes, but also using the library to forward and to promote some other initiatives. So not just as having somewhere to display boards, but to talk, for example, about Black History Month, but to think about what that means, how we can identify authors and stories and messaging that can go with that can be really powerful. The reading well, and as I've already mentioned, the mindfulness in terms of the overall well-being. So that's a quick run through in terms of where we are at and what the library is currently offering, and some sort of plans for the immediate future. But clearly tonight is about the vision for the libraries as we go forwards. So I just want to take you through the approach that we're going to take to that. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So we have identified broader aims around renewal, equality, ambition, with 2 key policy areas around climate change and levelling up as part of the Council's agenda. So the renewal of the library service and looking at what it means for the library service over the next 4 years, and crucially how the libraries, both the service and the buildings, can be used to forward some of the other initiatives like climate change and levelling up are very much at the heart of what we're looking to do. So what does that mean for the libraries, and how can the libraries help us achieve a much broader vision? And clearly for us to make that successful, we need to be working with partners, communities and residents. So I outlined the 1.5 million people who live in the county, how that looks very different across the piece. So we need to make sure that we are working very closely with our communities to understand what that can mean for them and the impact that can have on their input. So in order to do that, we've identified essentially 3 streams, and I'll just take you through each one very quickly. The first is the service delivery. So the core activities, what do we know the libraries for now? Obviously the opportunities to borrow books, what that can mean for e-libraries, what that can mean in terms of other use of the libraries, but to crucially tap into the service that we know it now and see how we can both extend and embrace other opportunities for it. And it's going to be key here that we start to speak and hear from not just current library users, but the non-library users as well. Because if we're going to increase the footfall and the use of the service, then clearly we need to understand what people want and why those people who aren't using the service already aren't doing so. Do they see it as irrelevant to them? Is the offer not there? Whatever the reason, we need to understand that so we can drive that up. The second part is what I'm terming the library infrastructure, and that really falls under two pieces. The first is around Wi-Fi, IT, connectivity in that sense. And the second is around the physical infrastructure of the buildings. So that might be about where a library is located. We have some libraries which are in fantastic places, and we have others that are poorly sited or have been there just for legacy and historical reasons. I stress this does not mean in any way that libraries will close. There is a very clear commitment to keep all those libraries open, but it may be that there are opportunities for us to move the library, or for us to place it with other partners, or for us to look at what other opportunities are around it. And also if there are any development opportunities as well, such as we've seen in Shenfield, where approval's been given for some apartments to go on top of a new library. And then the third stream is around supporting communities and families. And I outlined previously the commitment to the climate change and to the levelling up agendas. And we have a real opportunity here for us to use our libraries in a way that can help us achieve more. So literacy, school readiness, where we've got some really strong data, and we can use that data to then target support for particular families and in particular areas within the county, so that we can make sure that libraries are one of the tools through which we can do that. So to make sure that we are bringing all of that together, the service in terms of what people want from the library, making sure that the surrounds and the infrastructure are there to enable us to deliver it and to entice people in, but then crucially using the service and the buildings for that much broader initiative and the aim of supporting those more vulnerable communities and families. So the last slide here is the update and the next steps. So I mentioned that I held a session this morning, obviously got another one here and now. We're calling these early engagement because what I didn't want to do was leave it until we had produced a draft for comment. That will obviously come at the right time. But to share with you the approach and the ambition for the service more broadly, and the approach that we're going to take. So on the feedback of this, and as I said before, there will be slides will go online, and we're going to be putting together some FAQs as well, that we will then develop the draft plan towards the back end of next month. And for mid-November, we will start the formal consultation process. So that will be partly online, it will be in libraries, but we're also going to look beyond the more traditional way in which we hold consultations, and go out and stop and speak to some people in the streets, particularly again trying to identify those who are not using the library currently, and working with partners and community groups and organisations to try and get as much feedback as we can through the strategy in terms of what it is that we want to see from our libraries, and how that can then come forward in terms of the response to the consultation, which will be early next year. And then obviously the finalisation, the sign off for a plan for libraries in the future. I will just close by also adding that in terms of the budget, the County Council is looking at producing a 4-year budget. So there will be some commitments through the libraries that would take place, not just next year, but over the next 4 years, particularly around that middle stream that I was talking about in terms of the infrastructure. There are some libraries that simply need a good paint. There are others where it's much more fundamental in terms of ventilation, windows, etc. So we will be putting together a 4-year programme for that to share with you in terms of what that means for each individual library. I will leave it there and hand back to the chair, and obviously happy to take questions. Thank you.
Councillor McKinlay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll start the session, the Q&A session, with a couple of questions that have been sent in by members of the public. So if I could start off with, sorry, let me find it. If I could ask you, Councillor McKinlay, to answer the question sent in by Ella, which is, will you do your best to ensure that libraries remain open and do not go online, please?
Yes, and I think from memory that Ella may have been 15 years old. So the first thing I'd say is that is great that we are hearing from youngsters as well, and that's something that I very much want to promote. Yes, I can give you a guarantee that the libraries will be remaining open, and as I mentioned as well, they will also be staffed by ECC personnel.
That's great. Thank you very much, Councillor McKinlay. Let's move on to the second question then, which came in, and this is a bit more specific about IT. So maybe if I could ask Juliet to respond to this one, please. And the question is, Juliet, what steps is Essex County Council Library branches taking to provide more up-to-date IT? Specifically, the questioner sees a very high demand for Wi-Fi enabled printers to help people in a hurry print out documents from their phones or tablets. And also, will there be more desk space with nearby power sockets for customers wanting to study and use their own laptops or tablets for an extended period of time? So could I ask that one of you, please, Juliet?
Yes, thank you. So yes, we will be, we have updated the IT in our libraries. We've just replaced, we replaced all of our People's Network computers the beginning of last year. So we've got, you know, big screens and, you know, up-to-date auxiliaries to go with those. We're also, we'll be, whenever we refurbish a library, we will be looking at putting in some new sockets for people to be able to charge up their devices and the mobile devices. With Wi-Fi printing, absolutely, that's something that I'm really keen on ensuring that we do offer, and we are talking to corporate tech services about being, you know, being able to enhance our Wi-Fi offer and our printing offer, definitely.
That's great. Thank you very much. So let's turn to the questions that have been submitted today. And the first question comes from Liz Miles. Will there be events in all libraries or only main libraries? So Councillor McKinlay, could I ask you to respond to that one first, please?
So in terms of events, it depends what we mean by events, I suppose. And you know, in many cases, we have some very small events that take place, but clearly there's the opportunity for much bigger events as well. And I think when it comes to the events, it really hones in on the fact that all of our libraries are so different, and the communities that they serve are different. And there's obviously the practical side around, you know, the smaller libraries, the larger libraries. So I would like to see, and I think this is where the communities can really come together, local input around what it is that people want and what it is that we can obviously work with them in terms of delivering, how volunteers can step up, what does it mean for, you know, local groups, parish councils, your library users, people who maybe want to use the space for different reasons. So I think that answer very much depends on a library by library basis, but there's absolutely scope there for us to increase the use of the buildings without a doubt.
Councillor McKinlay, thank you very much. Juliet, is there anything you'd like to add to that at all, please?
Thank you. I think when we're organising any events and activities now, we are making sure that we're rolling them out across the county. So being really conscious of not just having one event in one library, but making sure that we're running events across the county in more in appropriate libraries and areas.
Great, thank you very much, Juliet. Okay, let's go on to the next question then, which is from Polly. And the question is, reading is core to general education and good outcomes. There are large pockets of people in Essex who have poor educational outcomes, and there are places that offer no adult education. Surely this is an opportunity for the library to be used to upskill the population. It's not just about the children, but the adults too. And Councillor McKinlay, if I could ask you to comment on that one first, please.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree 100%. And we know that through a lot of our data, where there is low attainment for children, then very often there are issues around literacy for parents as well. So this is all about enabling people to get on and to support them, make the most of their lives. So in some cases, although I've obviously spoken much about the youngsters, the root of it is to actually help some of the parents in this regard as well. So we are very much looking at what we can do in that space. And I think, you know, you're absolutely right. We know there are pockets, whether that's through, you know, different groups, different cohorts of people, or whether we look at it on a geographical basis. And we've been doing a lot of work on this over the summer to understand what that means. And you can start to layer educational outcomes with life opportunities, you know, good housing, bad housing, and everything else that goes with that. So there is an absolute wealth of data there. And what we want to do is make sure that we can use that in the most productive way. I would add as well that what we also find, and you'll hear this a lot if you speak to social services as well, that some of the most vulnerable who we really want to target don't come and readily walk into the services that may be on offer. So there's an opportunity there for us to break down some of those barriers and to take the library service out, going into you know, different areas within the county, but also different buildings. It's not always the best place to initially try and get somebody into a council or a civic building, because for whatever reason they can sometimes be hesitant. So I think we need to be creative, but absolutely recognising, you know, it's youngsters, it's their parents, it can be, you know, groups within communities where we absolutely have an opportunity here to help and to target that help.
That's great. Thank you, Councillor McKinlay. And again, Juliet, is there anything you'd like to add on top of what the councillor has said, please?
I was just going to add that we're working with adult community learning as well. Now that we're coming out of the pandemic, you know, working with them again to offer classes and things in libraries. Obviously with Harlow, we're going to be sharing the building with ACL, which is going to be great. So yeah, absolutely sort of bearing in mind and making sure that we are targeting services to adults as well as to children.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to the next question. This is a question from Nick, and it's a very broad question. It is, what do you actually mean when you talk about, quotes, levelling up? And how do you hope to achieve this? So, Councillor McKinlay, if I could ask that one of you, please.
Thank you. Yes, it's a very good question, but it's also a huge question, as you'll appreciate. So broadly, by levelling up, we know that there are geographies and groups of people within the county and within the country, for that matter, whose life chances are hindered by, you know, where they live, by their background, by the school that they've been to, by the housing that they experience, and so it goes on. And what we want to do is identify what those barriers are and where that is particularly a problem. And we've done that work over the summer, and we're just in the process of working that through with the rest of the cabinet, to then understand what it is that we can do, whether that's about us as a convener, whether it's about the county council intervening, how we can pull all of that different data together, that really rich data, and put in place policies and to make change to help break down some of those barriers. So we've identified, for example, particular socioeconomic groups, working families who may struggle with the cost of living, with the cost of childcare, who therefore are very limited in terms of being able to then go on and get better qualifications, where they could then obviously apply for better jobs, and so it goes on. So it's very much about increasing opportunity and looking at what we can do across the piece. So, you know, we know there are pockets within the county where school readiness is very poor. And where that is the case, we know that we have opportunities here, and I think through the library service, to be able to take what we're doing and the opportunities that brings with it to some of those families to help the children be more ready for school. You know, carpet time in the library, sitting down before you go to school, what that can mean, how we can support some of those families more broadly as well, whether that's through signposting, whether it's through wellbeing, to help and get the children into a place where they are ready to start school, and to think about what that means for literacy. You know, children who are read to before the age of 2 will fare much better at school in those primary ages. If you do better at primary, your chances are much better when you get into secondary. And none of this is rocket science, but where we have that data, we need to make sure that we are using it and that we can really target that support. So very much about using the data to break down some of those challenges and those obstacles to enable people to get on and achieve more.
Thank you very much, Councillor McKinlay. Let's move on to a more operational question. So I'll ask this one of Juliet, and it's a question about book stock. It says the question notes that improving book stock is not mentioned in ECC's service ambitions. Will you, ECC, be replacing the 470,000 books that were removed and not replaced from Essex library shelves over the last 10+ years? And the questioner is specifically asking about physical books available on Essex library shelves for browsing in person, rather than books that can be ordered. So, Juliet, could I ask you that one, please, in the first instance. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think it's important to recognise that our core service is books, and we will absolutely continue to improve our stock selection. But we don't want huge, libraries full of books that are not going out. That stock has got to be vibrant, it's got to work well. We've got a new tool now that will help us to really give us some insight into our stock and help us manage it and make sure that our stock's in the right place, in the right libraries, and be able to move that around so that it is working well for us, and that it is also targeted at the audiences that it needs to. So the people coming in to use their local libraries, we will have the stock on the shelves available for them. And absolutely that we've got a book budget that we will be continuing to spend. We've got a good stock contract, and we will still be replacing the books that we need to and buying new stock.
Thank you very much, Juliet. And here's a question about the library service budget, and it's from David, and it's actually two questions. It says, how much does the library service cost to run? And is the budget set to increase or decrease in line with a rising population? So, Councillor McKinlay, would you like to start off the answer to that one, please?
Yes, so it depends how we break down the budgets, because it goes across different streams. Overall, just over 10 million, I think is the figure. That's obviously the running of the buildings, it's the staff, it's the book costs, it's the subscriptions, we've got Wi-Fi access, and so the list goes on. Where there is some really good opportunities, and I've obviously seen some of the chat coming through, is around how we want to spend some of the more discretionary spend, if I put it like that. So over the course of the next 4 years, we're going to have around £7 million, which we would normally use for stock rotation or to replace those that have seen better days, or we've got new titles, etc. And through the course of how that works, it's very much obviously left to the staff, who will be able to look at the requests that come in, the usage. Juliet just outlined how we want to make sure that the stock is continually refreshed and it's up to date and it's reflective of what people are saying they want to use and they want to see. But I think there's an opportunity there for the public to get more involved in that as well. And that's something that we, as a service, we're going to be talking about, to think about how that money can be spent to reflect what it is that members of the public want to see as well. I don't just mean on a sort of individual book ordering basis, but to do something more substantial, that when we come to looking at how we profile that spend and what that looks like, that we can very much hear from library users and groups about what they think and how they feel about it. Juliet might want to add to that.
Thank you, Councillor McKinlay. Juliet, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think you've said it all. Sorry. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'll move on to the next question, which is from Joe. And the question is that there seems to be a gap for services targeted at teenagers and young adults. To establish engagement, what strategy have you in place targeted at this demographic, please? So maybe if I could ask that one of Juliet in the first instance. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are looking at how we can target our services and encourage young people to come into the libraries. We did used to have a teenage reading group, I understand, and that is something that we would like to revisit again. We do have young champions coming in, that we can ask about our stock and our events and activities, and we would like to ask them how we can improve services to teenagers, obviously working with schools as well.
Thank you very much. And we have a similar question from Hilary, which is, can you cover the promotion strategy being developed for library services going forward, and in particular the need for enhanced visibility and putting more information out there proactively for local residents? So I guess the question from Hilary is, what kind of things can local residents expect to see going forward in terms of getting the information out there?
So I think that's a really good question, and it's actually very similar to one that we had this morning, which was talking about the communication from libraries, and the suggestion came forwards that, for example, we have a Pan Essex Twitter handle, Facebook page about Essex libraries, but could that be localised? Because that would then give us the opportunity to obviously talk about, you know, libraries within a certain borough, city district, that could then go out on the relevant chatter pages locally, so people are aware. And then you get into that sort of positive self-perpetuation in terms of, you know, people are local, they see what's happening, they can attend, and they can then, you know, hopefully therefore encourage that they will then share that information more broadly, and that we can therefore get onto this very positive cycle. I said it this morning, and I've said it again, that I think we have been pretty poor in the past at how we communicate with people in terms of advertising what we're doing and promoting, because there is a wealth of different activity that goes on within the library service and within individual libraries as well. And I'd like us to get to the place where we could, you know, very much improve that, and that's going to be part of what you'll see in the draft later this year. But I don't think we can do that alone as a service. It does mean that we need to work locally, you know, with partners, with communities, with different organisations and groups, so that we can all be talking up the service and shouting out about the breadth of what's on offer there. And that offer is only set to get better and more broad, because we are looking at expanding. I've mentioned about some of the wellness sessions that are there. We launched the Essex Library of Things not so long ago, where you can, you know, not just borrow a book, but you can actually go along and you can borrow a bread maker, you can borrow camping equipment. There's a variety of, you know, different things that people can go along and borrow, and just think about things a bit broader. So it's you know, it's really reflective of what people are saying they want. So I'd like to see more of that, but I absolutely take the point around communication. I think that needs to be much better.
Thank you very much, Councillor McKinlay. Let's have a slight change of direction. There's a question here that was sent in by email beforehand. And the question is, some libraries are in premises that are currently not fit for purpose, let alone for community purposes, due to lack of size, ventilation, and the facilities within them. So what will be done about that, please, Councillor McKinlay?
Sorry, some of the sound dropped out for me then. I didn't quite catch what you said.
Sure. Shall I just repeat it for you?
Please.
Yeah, sure. So this is one of the questions that came in by email beforehand. And the question is, some libraries are in premises that are currently not fit for purpose, let alone for community purposes, due to lack of size, ventilation, and the facilities within the buildings. So what will be done about those challenges, please? Thank you.
Thank you. So that really comes back to that middle stream around infrastructure that I was talking about. We know that there are some libraries who, you know, maybe are located somewhere for historical reasons, decisions that were taken, you know, however many years ago. And then as the question rightly says, that they're not always in the condition that we would want or expect them to be. And that location may not be the best. And that's where I think we need to be honest about that and see whether it's worthwhile and what the cost is to actually bring a particular building back up, because in some cases it can run to hundreds of thousands of pounds, or if there are other opportunities for us to move the library or locate it elsewhere. But I will stress that if that happens, it is about moving it, not closing it. So I think, you know, through part of that work that we do as that second stream, some of it may be cosmetic, but where there are more fundamental issues with the building, then we need to consider that in the way in which, you know, everybody would expect us to.
Great, thank you very much, Councillor McKinlay. Let's move on to a general theme that's coming out of the questions, and this is a series of questions sort of focusing about local studies sections of local libraries, about how we can improve accessibility for disabled people, encourage more people generally to access this part of the overall library service, and upskill the staff to be better trained on how to use research tools such as microfiche. So Councillor McKinlay, would you like to start off on this one, or would you like Juliet to deal with this one, please?
I think it's probably more for Juliet in terms of staff management. Yeah. I would just say that as a council, we would always invest in our staff to make sure that they were appropriately skilled and reflected, you know, what's needed in terms of the job. But Juliet would be able to expand further, I'm sure.
Great, thanks very much, Councillor McKinlay. So Juliet, access for disabled people encouraging more people to use the local studies section of the library service, and then how we upskill and equip the staff on how to use the research tools that are available, please. Thank you.
So some of our libraries do have some local studies collections, and the staff that are based in those libraries should have the skills to be able to support customers wanting to use those facilities. And we're obviously always making sure that staff receive refresher training. The same with people with disabilities. Obviously, we're making sure that all our libraries are accessible. And we do have sensory champions in the libraries, so that's staff that have received training on how to help people with visual and hearing impairments. So, but that training is ongoing, and obviously we're making sure that through staff talking to managers, if there is a training need, that we put that in place.
Great, thank you very much, Juliet. And if I could stick with you for another question about early years. So will you, the library service, be working with early years providers to offer under 5 sessions in libraries, please?
Yes, well, obviously we will be. We will be working with early years. We already run our rhyme times in every single library, and we're bringing those back now after the year that we've had of lockdown, and they're very, very popular. In fact, some of our libraries have had to increase those sessions because they've proved really popular with parents. But we will be working with day nurseries across the county as well, to see how else we can support children that are, due to before they start school, and to see how we can work with them. Very keen to have visits to libraries from nurseries in the local areas, or class visits from schools.
Great, thank you very much, Juliet. Another question for Councillor McKinlay from Carl, and this touches on what you were talking about earlier about community engagement. So can you elaborate on using libraries as social hubs, and is there additional funding available from other ECC departmental budgets? Councillor McKinlay, please.
So the short answer is potentially yes. It would depend, what the initiative was. So for example, we have identified arts and culture as a priority area. That's still all being worked through in terms of the budget commitments, etc. But where there are other priorities like that and opportunities that we could therefore forward within the libraries, then there would be other pots that could be tapped into around that. There's also pots that can support community initiatives in this regard as well. So, for example, this year each county council has access to £10,000. It's all in a one-off payment, but if there was a local group or an initiative that wanted to have that additional funding, which would help them then buy a piece of equipment to put on film nights or whatever it may be, then there is the opportunity there to speak to your local councillor and see how that funding can obviously be accessed. And then more broadly around when we say social hubs, I try and avoid the word hub generally, really, because I think it's very overused. But essentially what we're trying to say is, if you're going to encourage more people into the library building and get them to use the service more, then we need to look across the piece and understand what people want and where those opportunities lie to bring things together. So, if that's around specific library services, or if that's around issues such as, social isolation, what does that mean? What does that look like? And what can we do? And how can the libraries be part of the solution to some of those challenges? So, yes, undoubtedly, there will be pots of money that, as I say, groups could bid for if they came up with initiatives that they wanted to then see and put in practice.
Great, thank you very much. We're now getting into the last few minutes of our Q&A session. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes still to go, and there are some questions to be covered. So the next question is for you, I think, Juliet, which is, can you consider making the use of the buildings free initially for social purposes and group activities until those social activities and group activities are up and running? Juliet, please.
sorry. So we do already welcome, obviously, social groups to come into the library and use the facilities while the library's open. That with some of our libraries, obviously, yes, we do have libraries when they're closed, and I think that that's something that I could speak to Councillor McKinlay about, how we can offer that space to local groups, so that, you know, we get best use out of the building as well and support the community.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next question, which again, I think in the first instance is probably yours, Juliet, and then Councillor McKinlay may wish to comment as well. But it's a question from Angela, and that is that, are there plans to open libraries for longer hours using paid staff?
So when we reopened our libraries on the 12th of April, we opened up with an additional 40 hours a week from the old opening hours timetables. So we made sure that we had a library open till 7 o'clock in every area. We got rid of lunchtime closures, which are really inconvenient, and every library is now open all day on a Saturday. Obviously, we will continue to review our opening hours to make sure that they really suit the communities using them, and possibly we will look at opening up for longer hours where that's possible to do so.
Thank you very much, Juliet. Is there anything you'd like to add, Councillor McKinlay?
No, not that one. I think Juliet's covered that off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on again to a question which I think is for Juliet in the first instance. It's a question from Deborah and Ian. And do you, Essex County Council, think the Springfield model will help you allocate staff resources to where they are most needed? So Juliet, please.
So I think this was referring to the use of volunteers. And I think obviously we've made the point that we will be using paid staff to keep our libraries open for the opening hours that we need to. There may be possibilities of having other services or other partners or volunteers in to add additional opening hours, which we do have in a couple of our libraries. But the emphasis is that our opening hours will be delivered by paid staff.
Thank you very much. And again, Councillor McKinlay, is there anything you'd like to add on this particular issue?
I think just to stress that, you know, as Juliet says, it will be about paid staff, and whilst I think there's absolutely a role for volunteers as well, for me that needs to be in addition to, not instead of. And I think if that principle is followed, that there can be some win-wins there for local communities, not just in terms of opening hours and what that can mean, but in actual fact, you know, if you volunteer for something, you know, you're not going to volunteer for something you don't believe in and that you're not invested in. So that can actually help strengthen some of the local ties as well. So yes, absolutely paid staff, but where volunteers can, you know, step up and support as well, then I think we very much welcome that.
Thank you very much. So we're down to the last two questions. First of all, one that came in by email, and this I think is probably for you in the first instance, Councillor McKinlay. And it is, how does the library service plan to get the input regarding local needs and wants from those who do not use or currently cannot use library services or are not online? So the examples given: people of no fixed abode, refugees, the infirm or disabled. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So this is something that we are thinking about in terms of the consultation itself. So, you know, clearly, if we want to speak to library users, we can use the libraries, and that, you know, that's a great way in which we can access it. We have got online. I don't think we should underplay the value that has. You know, most people now are online, and that, you know, that is very strong in terms of the impact that it can have. But clearly, where people are neither, don't fall into either bracket, then we need to think more broadly about how it is that we can communicate with them. And that's not necessarily easy. I mentioned about us going out and about and doing some street surveys to stop people and speak to them and understand what it is that they would like to see, particularly for the non-library users. There's also some community groups. Been questions coming through the chat there from parish councils. There was a question about, can we put flyers in for local food banks? These are all great ideas about, you know, how we can access different parts of the community who we may not readily have an initial contact with. So it is about using our community contacts and of course using our local councillors as well, and thinking about our partners in the, the district councils as well. It's a really difficult one because we need to keep it as broad as we possibly can. But I think most of that is going to come down to not just what we can do, but how we can work with, as I say, linkages and different partners as well, to see how they can promote and flag this as well.
Thank you very much. And the final question that I have here is, I think, for Juliet, and it's from Mandy. And it's, will you, the council, ensure that quiet space for reading and study will be protected? We know from the pandemic that for many such space has been compromised. Juliet, please.
Yes, and absolutely. Obviously, libraries are busy at different times and quiet at different times. And I think it's really important that we do ensure that that quiet space for reading and study time is protected. A lot of our libraries have got separate children's areas and study areas, and that is something that we will absolutely protect.
Thank you, Juliet. So that gets us to the end of our questions. Oh, actually, we've just got time for one more, and that is a summarised question based on a number of points that people have raised. And it says, regarding your levelling up and climate agenda, will you make copies of Dr. Seuss's books, The Lorax, available in all libraries? Juliet, please.
So as obviously as part of our stock management, we always look at what are the popular titles to try and make sure that we have a good selection of stock across all libraries. So I know that our stock manager is online at the moment, so I'm sure she'll be making a note of this request. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Juliet, and thank you very much, Councillor McKinlay. That gets us to the end of our Q&A session this evening, and thank you very much for all those that did ask questions this evening. I hope you found the answers given did indeed answer your questions and explain to you where the council is at the moment on this work. So I'll hand over now to Councillor McKinlay just to sum up and set out the next steps, please. Councillor McKinlay, over to you.
Thank you very much, and if I can just thank everybody for attending tonight. There have been some really good questions there, and I think what's quite helpful is that some of those questions actually echoed some of those that we had earlier today as well, so that helps us build up a picture in terms of different themes. And as I mentioned, we will be putting some FAQs out along with a copy of the presentation online, so if you know of anybody who hasn't been able to attend, please point them in that direction. This is what we were terming an engagement session, just to set out how we're looking to approach it, as I mentioned before, and there will be various stages where people will have an opportunity to both comment and ask questions. And when we do get to the publication of the draft plan for Essex Libraries, I will be holding more sessions like this as well, so we can take some questions directly, as well as the official response through the consultation. So again, thank you very much. We will be taking your comments away, and they will be feeding into the draft before we share that more broadly. And I hope that we'll be able to engage again in this format very soon. So it's certainly been very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.